Imagine Mark Twain, the literary giant, telling his brother, essentially, burn my letters. Said he didn't want any absurd literary remains published after he was planted.
Right. But then fast forward a few decades.
And this same Mark Twain is proudly talking about having stacks of literary remains. A whole treasure trove he definitely wanted the world to see.
But only after he was gone. That's the key part, isn't it? That contradiction is fascinating.
It really is. And that's exactly what we're plunging into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Our mission today is to explore that very collection. It's published as a book called Who Is Mark Twain?
Yeah, it's this incredible mix of previously unpublished essays, sketches, fables, all sorts of things.
And we're going to try and figure out what these hidden gems really tell us about Twain's mind, his creative process, which was, let's say, unconventional.
Definitely unconventional. And his social commentary, which was just so sharp and so ahead of its time. We want to show you how even his failures, or maybe just the stuff he didn't release, still absolutely sparkles with genius.
And we've got some great sources to draw on. We've looked at articles, research, notes about the book itself. A lot of this material comes from that huge archive, the Mark Twain papers at Berkeley.
Right, in the Bancroft Library. And some early manuscripts from Vassar College, too.
So we'll dig into why Twain might have kept these particular works secret, what they reveal about how he actually wrote.
And like you said, how relevant his insights still feel today. It's kind of shocking, actually.
It really is.
So let's start right there with that big contradiction.
Yeah.
1865, burn the letters. 1901, stacks of literary remains. I mean, the sheer volume he left behind when he died in 1910, it's staggering.
It's the largest collection of personal papers from any 19th century American author. We're talking 500,000 pages. Letters, notebooks, that huge autobiography.
Unpublished manuscripts, tons of incoming mail, photos, bills, just everything.
It tells you he wasn't someone who threw things away lightly. His intentions clearly shifted over time.
Unlike other authors, right, who often destroyed drafts.
Exactly. Think about when they found the first half of the Huckleberry Finn manuscript back in '91.
Oh, yeah, that was a huge deal.
Right. And a big New York publisher was apparently really surprised Twain had even kept it. Most authors back then, they wanted to present the finished product, hide the messy bits, the struggles.
But Twain preserved it all. So he wasn't embarrassed by these remains, even the ones he didn't publish.
Doesn't seem like it. He seemed to see value in the whole process, every step. The journey, not just the destination.
Which leads us straight to his strategy for after he was gone, what he called the privilege of the grays.
He talked about it in his 1906 autobiography, the one he famously said couldn't be fully published for 100 years.
So what was the thinking there? Why wait?
His reasoning was pretty unique. He basically said he could speak more frankly from the grave. And a big part of that was because he lost his belief in immortality.
Okay, so how did not believing in an afterlife free him up as a writer?
Well, he figured he wouldn't be around to feel the personal pain of, shocking people or offending them with his more controversial opinions.
So it removed the consequences.
Exactly. It freed him from worrying about the bitter cost, as he put it. Things like ruining his business dealings, losing friends, public attacks, even upsetting his family.
He could say what he really thought without the immediate blowback. That's quite a strategy for free speech.
It's incredibly strategic, using death as the ultimate shield.
So he leaves behind this mountain of material. Who gets to decide what sees the light of day? And did they actually follow his wishes about this privilege of the grave?
That's where it gets complicated. The control of the papers, the custodianship had a huge impact. Initially, it was his official biographer, Albert Bigelow Paine, and his daughter, Clara Clemens.
And they had sole access for decades, right? From 1910 to 37.
Correct. Now, Paine said he was following Twain's wishes, but honestly, there's not much hard evidence for that. Some people doubt Twain really wanted things kept quite so restricted.
And after Paine?
Bernard DeVoto took over. He faced similar issues, trying to balance respect for Twain with, getting the work out there. He did publish several dozen more pieces.
Like Letters from the Earth.
Yeah, but even that wasn't published until '62, years after DeVoto himself died, because Clara objected to some of it. DeVoto was very clear he only wanted to publish the very best, partly to protect Twain's reputation. He explicitly forbade publishing wholly unimportant fragments.
So it was a really slow trickle. It sounds like the University of California taking over in 1962 was a big step towards more systematic publication.
Absolutely. But even after decades of scholarly work, there were still dozens and dozens of finished and unfinished pieces left in the archive.
Which brings us to this collection, Who is Mark Twain? It's a sampling of those remaining pieces, aimed more at a general audience.
Right. 24 pieces giving us a taste.
So what's the main thing to understand about these remains? Are they just the rejects, the stuff that wasn't good enough?
No, definitely not. The editor makes that point clear. They aren't being sold as, like, lost masterpieces that suddenly rival Huck Finn.
Okay. So what is their value then?
Their real value is as a window into Mark Twain's literary workshop. That's the key phrase. They show his incredible talent, that typical Twain sparkle and precision in the writing, his wickedly funny humor, even when a piece isn't finished.
So the reason they weren't published before wasn't necessarily quality?
Not usually. It was more often due to those particular circumstances we talked about, maybe his privilege of the grave plan, or sometimes he just lost interest, or the idea took a detour he didn't like. But it wasn't inherently because the writing was inferior. They give you a raw, unfiltered look inside his head.
That makes sense. It highlights that restless inventiveness people talk about with Twain, how he just grab an idea and run with it, sometimes without knowing where it was going.
Exactly. And a perfect example of that process is in the unfinished piece, Whenever I'm About to Publish a Book. It dates from the early 1880s.
Right, where he talks about his sort of private focus group, his literary jury.
Yeah, this unconventional group of friends he used. A real mix of people, different senses of humor, different levels of practicality. But the ultimate judge was the man who always goes to sleep.
Huh. That is peak Twain. The sleepy judge. So how did that work?
It was simple, apparently. If the guy nodded off within 15 minutes of Twain reading aloud.
The manuscript got burned. Seriously.
That's what he claims. But if the guy stayed awake for 45 minutes, Twain felt confident enough to publish.
That's a unique way to gauge reader engagement. What does it tell you?
Well, it's funny, but it's also pretty smart, right? He wasn't looking for flattery. He wanted to know if the work genuinely held someone's attention, even someone prone to dozing off. It's practical audience testing.
And it shows he valued that kind of gut reaction, maybe more than what a professional critic might say.
Seems like it. He makes a distinction between the general public and the professional reviewer, the top crust. He wanted that candid, maybe even involuntary response. And characteristically, the piece just stops abruptly. Maybe he thought better of actually quoting critics directly in it. Shows his own editing process in action.
That self-awareness, often playful, comes through in his public stuff too, like in Frank Fuller and My First New York Lecture, which was a draft from 1895.
Right, for that big lecture tour he did to pay off his debts.
And it's such a brilliant send-up of celebrity culture, isn't it?
Oh, totally. He lists all these famous, important men, General Grant, Sheridan, Sherman, big names. They were invited to his first lecture.
But they all sent regrets. Didn't show up.
Exactly. Polite regrets, lamentations, but no-shows. Then he contrasts that with the people who did come.
Like Boss Tweed.
Oh.
And Heenan the Boxer.
Yeah. Criminals, basically, or at least notorious figures. He calls them public men who served the state. The irony is just dripping. It's a fantastic jab at who actually shows up versus who just performs public virtue.
He really skewered the whole celebrity game there. Did he use that kind of humor for other frustrations, like bureaucratic stuff?
Oh, absolutely. There's a great bit in that same piece about his English copyright income. Apparently, the British government decided to tax it as gasworks.
Gasworks. Seriously.
Yeah. So Twain, being Twain, writes this rambling, intentionally ignorant-ass letter directly to Queen Victoria.
Pretending she handles all the empire's tax issues personally.
Pretty much. It's pure Twain taking a ridiculous situation and dialing it up to 11 for comedic effect, using his own annoyances as satirical fuel. But again, he set this piece aside. Maybe the reason for the lecture tour, his bankruptcy, just felt a bit too raw to keep mining for humor at that point.
That makes sense. What about Conversations with Satan from the late 1890s? Starts with Twain wanting to interview Satan in Vienna.
Yeah, and Satan appears, looking quite dapper, actually, like an Anglican bishop.
That there's a giveaway.
He casts his shadow, that's the tell. And his opening line is classic Twain cynicism. Twain asks if he knows America.
And Satan says,
"Well, no. I have not been there lately. I am not needed there."
Oof, that's a punch. What's the deeper insight in this one, though? Does it go beyond that initial jab?
Well, that line itself is a pretty sharp indictment, suggesting America's already so corrupt, Satan's job is done there. The conversation then takes a funny turn into comparing German stoves and American heating.
Okay.
But the really revealing part is the long section about cigars.
Ah, the famous long nines experiment. Tell us about that.
Right. So he finds these incredibly cheap cigars, like 27 cents a barrel cheap. He actually enjoys them.
But the packaging was bad.
Terrible. Ugly blue pasteboard boxes. Vulgar and plebeian, he called them. So what does he do? He gets fancy labels, puts the cigars in a nice polished mahogany box.
Next up a story.
Claims they were a special gift from the Captain General of Cuba. Couldn't be bought for money. Total fabrication.
And his friends.
They bought it completely. They handled the cigars with the deepest reverence, smoked them in ecstasy. But then, a year later, he gives the same friends the exact same cigars, but back in the original ugly blue boxes.
Let me guess. They hated them.
Couldn't stand them. Left within 10 minutes. It's such a perfect illustration of how easily we're fooled by appearances, by branding, by the story, rather than the actual substance. Human vanity and superstition, as he calls it, trumping reality.
That's brilliant. And like some others, he just left this piece unfinished.
Yeah, seems he felt the narrative had strayed too far with the cigar digression. That internal editor kicked in again.
It's so clear that even in these unfinished bits, Twain was constantly driven to critique society. And it all links back to that core idea we started with, the privilege of the grave.
Absolutely. That belief that real free speech belongs to the dead because the living can't afford the bitter cost.
How did that play out in his unpublished commentary on politics or religion?
We'll take The Missionary in World Politics from 1900. He wrote it for the London Times, signed it X, but never actually sent it in.
An anonymous critique. What was he arguing?
He was arguing that Christian missionaries often insulted local cultures and, more pointedly, served as excuses for European powers to exploit other countries.
He had specific examples.
Yeah, he cites the case where a German missionary's death in China, right after the Boxer Rebellion, resulted in Germany demanding a huge payment, 40,000 pounds plus land for a church. He saw it as imperialism disguised as piety.
And his personal feelings were pretty strong.
Very. He wrote privately, "My sympathies are with the Chinese," and said he hoped they'd drive all the foreigners out. It shows his consistent stance against hypocrisy and exploitation, whether it was European or later American imperialism, like in the Philippines, which he did criticize publicly.
He wasn't afraid to aim that critical lens at religion itself either. There's I Rise to a Question of Privilege from 1868.
Right, likely an unsent reply to a clergyman who'd rebuked him publicly.
And he tells that story about his friend comparing Moses in the desert to his stagecoach line.
Yeah, his comrade Jack comparing Moses taking 40 years to cross the desert with Ben Holliday's Overland Express doing it in 36 hours. It sounds totally irreverent.
But what was his actual point?
He uses that anecdote to argue against what he called sham reverence. He thought people venerated things just out of habit, without distinguishing true holiness from the superficial stuff, the excrescences, as he put it. He felt that kind of fake reverence actually provoked skepticism.
So he wanted to strip away the nonsense.
Basically, he controversially said if it were up to him, he'd leave very little standing in Palestine except maybe Calvary Hill itself. It's a provocative call for authenticity and faith, getting rid of the clutter.
And he applied that same strip away the pretense logic to the media, didn't he? In the American Press from 1888.
Yeah, that was a direct response to the English critic Matthew Arnold, who'd criticized the American press for lacking reverence.
And Twain disagreed.
Yeah.
Strongly.
Oh, completely. He flipped the argument. He said the solemnity you saw in the European press was just a smokescreen to hide the humbug of monarchies and established churches.
So the lack of reverence in American papers was actually a good thing.
Exactly. He called its frank and cheerful irreverence its most valuable quality. A crucial safeguard for liberty, essential for exposing shams and delusions. For Twain, irreverence wasn't a bug. It was a feature, a necessary tool against deception and power.
That feels incredibly relevant today. Is there another unpublished piece that shows his critique of media practices?
Definitely. You can connect it straight back to an earlier sketch, probably unfinished, called Interviewing the Interviewer from around 1870.
What happens in that one?
He depicts this really cynical editor, Charles A. Dana, basically coaching a reporter on how to succeed in journalism.
And the advice is?
Pretty grim. Make a sensation. Vilify everything that is unpopular. Hit every man that is down. Libel prominent people who won't sue. And just straight up fabricate news claim General Grant is drunk or that Twain himself is robbing graveyards.
Wow. So he was calling out sensationalism, fake news, clickbait, whatever the 1870 equivalent was. way back then.
Absolutely. He saw the danger of news being driven purely by scandal and generating buzz rather than truth. It resonates powerfully with our media landscape now.
He really did have his finger on the pulse.
Yeah.
And his thinking on equality seems pretty nuanced, too, like in Professor Mahaffy on Equality from 1889.
Yeah, he's responding to this Professor Mahaffy from Dublin, who apparently misunderstood the Declaration of Independence. Mahaffy thought all men are created equal meant like physically identical or having the same abilities.
Which is obviously not the point. How did Twain clarify it?
Twain explained that Americans, or at least the American ideal, wasn't about physical equality, it was about political equality. Freedom from masters, from being owned. Equal rights and privileges under the law. He says flatly, no slave exists in America, referring to the legal abolition, of course.
So a focus on legal and social freedom, not biological sameness.
Exactly. It shows a thoughtful engagement with those core American ideals, acknowledging their complexity even in his own time.
Okay, moving away from the direct commentary.
Yeah.
Let's talk about his humor and just his sharp eye for human behavior. Even in stuff his own family found too much, like The Undertaker's Tale.
Oh, yeah. That one's something else. From 1877, it's this dark, macabre burlesque. You've got this sort of Horatio Alger-type hero who ends up living with the cadaver family.
Undertakers, naturally.
Whose entire business, their whole well-being depends on people dying.
And what happened when he read this one to his family focus group?
Well, unlike the Sleepy Judge test, this one apparently landed with a thud. He described their reaction as ghastly silence and disapproval. His wife Livy could only manage to say, "Youth, let's walk a little."
Wow, so even his inner circle thought he'd gone too far.
Seems like it. It really shows how daring his humor was, tackling themes of profiting from death and suffering head-on, way ahead of its time probably, but he wrote it anyway.
And the story itself.
It builds to this climax where the cadavers are facing ruin because business is slow, not enough death. But then they're saved by a sudden wave of fatalities, including a cholera outbreak. Even the story's villain gets conveniently taken out. It's dark, twisted, but perfectly constructed satire.
He really didn't shy away. Then there's his observation of people, like in A Group of Servants from 1898, the character Wuthering Heights.
Yes, his Austrian maid. It's such a vivid character sketch. He just nails her personality, this endless torrent of talk, often contradicting herself, always interfering.
Creating friction with his wife.
Huge friction with Livy, the executive, as he calls her. Wuthering Heights apparently justified everything she did by saying it was Viennese custom. But Twain himself seems utterly delighted by her chaos. He calls her his personal circus, menagerie, fireworks.
It shows his amazing ability to find fascinating character studies and humor in just everyday domestic life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. He turns the mundane to brilliant narrative.
And he did that with fables, too. The Jungle is Gus's Man from 1902. What's the setup there?
The animals in the jungle hear stories about humans from a fox who has traveled, and they start discussing us.
What confuses them?
They're particularly baffled by clothing. Humans boast about being God's finest creation, yet they wear these artificial materials because they're ashamed to be seen naked.
Leading to what conclusion from the animals?
Their conclusion is sharp. It must be a dirty-minded animal that will be nasty in God's presence and ashamed to be nasty in the presence of his own kind.
Classic Twain reversal.
Yeah.
Using the animal's innocent logic to expose human hypocrisy about bodies and shame.
Precisely. It forces you, the reader, to look at familiar customs through a completely different non-human lens and see the potential absurdity.
Let's get personal. Well, Twain personal. Happy memories of the dental chair from the mid-1880s.
Yes, his visit to Dr. John Mankey Riggs, the guy who identified and treated Riggs's disease, pyorrhea.
What fascinated Twain about him, besides fixing his teeth?
He was also really interested in Riggs's connection to the discovery of anesthesia. Riggs was present at the very first painless operation. Twain was clearly drawn to that historical moment.
But the piece is also full of Twain's usual exaggeration about pain, right?
Oh, completely. He talks about feeling chips of bone the size of my hand being scraped off while admitting they were probably microscopic. Vintage Twain hyperbole.
And his thoughts on pain relief.
And smoking.
He humorously credits smoking as the best of preservatives for the teeth, which is questionable advice. And he found chloroform useful because it made his pains feel impersonal, like they belonged to someone else, so he didn't mind them. That's a funny insight into how he dealt with discomfort.
He also nailed relatable frustrations, like in the music box from 1879, the wrong order.
Exactly. He ordered the specific music box meant to sound soft, like flutes and violins, but what arrived was this horrible cacophony: bells, gongs, drums. He called it a nerve-wrenching accumulation, a Gatling gun in disguise.
You've all been there with a bad online order, maybe. What makes it funny? Part of the humor is the indifferent English salesman he dealt with, who just hummed along distractingly while demonstrating the boxes. And Twain, characteristically, ends up blaming himself, partly for the mix-up, because he didn't provide his specific tunes right away. It's that universal feeling of consumer frustration mixed with a bit of self-reproach.
Finally, there's a really poignant one, Telegraph Dog, from 1907.
Yeah, this one's quite different. It's about a dog named Billy during an Indian war.
Who sends messages how?
By barking in Morse code to the soldiers trapped in a fort. It's an incredible image.
And it's a heroic story.
Very. Billy makes dangerous runs, delivers vital messages, gets shot, and ultimately dies licking the hand of the soldier, Sandy, whose promotion Billy basically secured. But the dog is still sacrificed in the process.
So beneath the heroism, there are deeper themes.
Absolutely. Loyalty, communication under pressure, incredible sacrifice, the value placed on different lives in conflict. Twain packs a lot into a very short, quite moving narrative. It shows his range. He wasn't just about the laughs.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back, this deep dive into who is Mark Twain, it really does peel back the layers, doesn't it? We see so much more than just the famous humorist.
Definitely. You see the experimental writer, the incredibly sharp social critic, and this surprisingly private person who consciously decided to keep some of his most explosive thoughts locked away in that box of posthumous stuff.
Waiting for the privilege of the grave to let them out.
Right. And what's striking is how much of it still hits home. His takes on media sensationalism, on what equality really means, on hypocrisy in politics and religion, on just basic human vanity.
It doesn't feel dated. It feels sharp, maybe even a little uncomfortable today.
Exactly. Over a century later, his observations still resonate, sometimes uncomfortably so. These reminds aren't just relics. They feel like they're still part of the conversation.
Twain believed really strongly that discriminating irreverence was vital for liberty, that it protected freedom.
Yeah, the creator and protector of human liberty, he called it.
Right. And he deliberately saved his deepest, maybe most irreverent truths for us, for posterity, because he felt the people of his own time couldn't handle them, or the cost was too high for him.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a final thought. What does that tell us about the public conversation back then, and maybe about ours now? If today's big figures, our modern Mark Twains, had a similar box of posthumous stuff, what kinds of unvarnished truths maybe born from similar social pressures or costs, might we find in their boxes 100 years from now? What do you think?